We are very pleased this afternoon to have our next speaker who is a journalist with such national stature. We're very proud of that. David Kerley is an ABC News correspondent based in Washington, D.C. He covers transportation, and so this past year he's done some amazing work on that bizarre story about the missing Malaysian airliner. He's been able to break fresh information on that. He's had a lot of wide-ranging assignments, including spending time in the war zone in Iraq as well. Dave began in journalism right here on the Cal Poly campus. He was news director at KCPR. In fact, we both started here about the same time. He was news director. I was an assistant news director. He went to work for KCOY TV in Santa Maria, and then that followed TV jobs in Boise, Seattle, and Chicago before his current posting in Washington, D.C. David and I never worked in the same cities, but there's a strange thing about journalism, and that is that major news stories often serve as a de facto reunion. So I would see Dave occasionally at some of these major stories, such as the Northridge earthquake in Los Angeles in '94, the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, and then most recently President Obama's West Coast visits. Again, we're very fortunate to have someone with Dave's national stature. Please welcome David Kerley.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. I forgot that I was his boss for a little while.
He'll never let me live that down.
You know, about a decade ago when I joined ABC News, I'd be walking down the hall and another correspondent who I basically grew up watching would pass me and he'd say, "David, are you speaking to the nation tonight?" And it struck me the first couple of times that, wow, yeah, I'm doing a story on World News Tonight, and 8 million people are going to see it, and I'll probably be live on television. And the first time was a little nerve-wracking, but it's just the job I do every day. Now this, talking to 100 colleagues and former classmates and students and alumni, this has been a little nerve-wracking for me to come and figure out something to talk to you about today that would stick with you and last beyond this day, unlike that commencement speaker, which you probably can't name and probably don't remember what they spoke about. I'm speaking to the chorus here. I'm going to echo a lot of what we've already heard today. When I was deciding what to talk about, instead of all my former classmates, I thought about the students. So I've tailored kind of what I want to do today to talk about these students and what is coming in their future. So I'm calling this the look that changed my life. It's kind of helped define me as a journalist, and I would argue a bit as a man in the way I live my life. It deals with the things we've been talking about today, truth and being truthful with those that you deal with. And I wanted to talk about the look which I think goes to the core of what we do. And despite the dreadful poll numbers for journalists, those who toil in the trenches, dealing with statements and subterfuge and spin, are actually practicing a very noble craft. And it is important what you do, and it can change the world. I believe the look also speaks to journalism and puts into perspective the, quote, change in our business. Karen just spoke about it. Everybody else has been talking about it today. There is undoubtedly a tsunami that has been washing across the world of technological changes. We've all seen it. It's brought everything from Twitter to Facebook. And with it, I think it's brought seismic changes in financial models. It's brought seismic changes in news gathering tools. But I don't believe that it's brought any seismic or foundational cracks to what we do, and that is that we gather facts and we tell a story with context and perspective. Now, this is a practice that is ancient, and all the smartphones and the Wi-Fi connections and the Twitter feeds, in my mind, don't change this. There is a line in an essay, it's a book as well, by the New York newspaper man Pete Hamill that I like to use. The book is News as a Verb. I think I've probably adapted this and changed it much more than he ever has. And the folks at ABC News Graphics helped me out a little bit. And so I talk about in the time of the caveman, the hunters and gatherers were on the move, and they would find a new cave. But they didn't know what's lurking in the back of the cave. Are there dangers back there? So one of the cavemen or cavewomen would pick up a torch, and they'd go to the back of the cave to find out what was there. And then they'd come to the front of the cave and tell everybody what they saw at the back of the cave. They were the first journalists, and that really hasn't changed. It's actually what we do every day, and it's what excites me about this, is finding out something that somebody else doesn't know and then sharing it, telling them a story about what's going on in their world. We are members of the tribe who pick up that torch and we go back to the cave, but when we come back, that caveman or cavewoman, I hope that they have seen the look so that when they talk to the other members of the tribe, they're able to explain what they saw and that they're able to actually tell it truthfully. So I got a couple of quotes here that I like, and one of them is, information is power. I use this a lot. I taught my kids about this. Generals use information to decide whether or not to go on the defensive or to attack. CEOs use information to decide whether it's time to hire or to fire, to increase production. Families use information to decide whether or not which neighborhood has the best schools, how are they going to fund their college education. But that information has to be good. It has to be truthful. Now, Judy used this quote, and I'm going to use it again because I'm going to use it twice. Actually, there's another quote coming up, but this is one of my favorite. There are three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. Don Henley used it in a song. It actually came out earlier, about 60 years earlier than that. And this is a problem. You see it on cable TV every night. You turn on the TV, and one cable channel says, this information means this on the right political spectrum. On another channel, it says the same information means this on the left political spectrum. But where did that information come from? It came from those of us who practice this craft with integrity and ethics. And then to Judy's quote that I like as well, from Senator Patrick Daniel Moynihan, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. And we've been talking about it. There is a debate, which I don't really quite understand, in our business with all these digital changes, citizen journalists, a camera and a Twitter account, that we're able to capture just about everything around the world. There is a debate about whether we need to change our standards. And so I have two papers that have, one an article and one's a paper. This one came from the Reuters Center for the Study of Journalism, suggesting that our ethics standards developed in the 19th century need a 21st century update to deal with the consumption of news on devices, with the speed at which news travels. And the author writes, it is increasingly important for legacy organizations to refine their standards to fit the digital era. Without adapting, they risk losing younger audiences. And I'm pretty sure my kids want truthful information. I don't really understand what we need to refine. There is tremendous pressure to go faster. There's no doubt about it, with Twitter and Facebook. Let me give you an example. Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords shot on a weekend that I was working. I had recently interviewed her husband, Mark Kerley, and we were getting ready to do a special report. And the bulletin started flying. NPR reported the Congresswoman is dead. CNN quoted that report. Our network competitors said that the Congresswoman was dead. We didn't go on the air. We didn't have that. We were going to work our sources until we got it right. David Muir was the anchor. I was going to go on and talk about the Congresswoman. We waited, and we waited, and we finally went on the air, reported what we knew, which was the Congresswoman was shot, and as we are being told, she is being treated. We waited, and we were right. Unfortunately, our website quoted one of those other stories that the Congresswoman was dead. A mistake. What about our standards need to be refined there, other than the fact that we made a mistake? So another journalist, writing in Playboy, thank you, Kevin Riggs, came up with an opposite suggestion that we're actually headed down a slippery slope. He theorizes that the way people are sharing stories is really changing the way we are dealing with stories. They're looking at them before they're vetted, and they end up enjoying the story whether or not it's true, and then they share it. He said in his piece, we can't handle the truth, digital journalism's lack of standards, and then goes on to say, the consequences are a generation of journalists lacking ethics, training, a public that accepts lower standards, and a gaping hole in the media's organizational practices that the unscrupulous exploit are as far-reaching for this industry's role in society as they are for the business of news itself. So this all leads me to the look that changed my life. It's still driving the way I am practicing this craft. Some of you know the look and probably already know what I'm talking about. and you've probably seen it around. And I would argue that Wayne Nichols took a very nice picture. It is the look. But my point is that this was not a difficult picture to take. I saw this a lot. I came to the journalism kind of late in my junior year, and I'd heard a lot about Hayes, and I was afraid. I mean, seriously, this guy's reputation was tough. I heard horror stories. So let me take you back 20 years, Hayes retiring, and recounting what he told Reporting One classes.
But I would look out at that room on the first day and say, the chances are that two people in this class are going to wind up amounting to anything in this business, the thing we're talking about. And by this business, I mean the word business, not necessarily print, but print or broadcast, because that's really what we're all about, even public relations. And
that was nice, even public relations. The sad thing for me, I never heard that. And what a mistake it was that I didn't get to see the look early. Hayes needed his glasses for his vision, but he used them as a tool. This is the look that meant you got an F for misspelling a proper noun. This is the look that meant you made a factual error. This is the look that said much is expected of someone who wants to carry the torch to the back of the cave. You know, he was a man of words, but the look made you associate the words with what he was trying to tell you. We're not talking about storytelling here, writing a lead, beginning, middle, or an end. Ethics and integrity, and the lessons I took away from the look boil down to 3 points. Are you right? Are you fair? And did you give the subjects an opportunity to comment? I call it the quest for foundational truth. We've been talking a lot about truth today, and Hayes taught us you may not really get to the truth on the first day you publish. You may not get all the way there on the second day, maybe on the third, but it's the historians who will finally decide whether or not you got close to the truth. So on this quest, we can find ourselves in some interesting places. And I did back in 2007. I was traveling with President Bush to Sydney, Australia. Oops, excuse me.
Aboriginal dancing.
And it was the Asia-Pacific meeting, 2007, the end of his presidency. Not a lot of interest in the summit by our programs. We're on the other side of the world, so 4 o'clock in the afternoon is 4 a.m. in New York. We make a pitch to Good Morning America. They're not interested in our story, and I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and take the Australian camera crew out for a beer. So we're out having a beer, and all of a sudden my cell phone rings. Not many people had the international cell phone number that I was carrying with me. And it's the president's press secretary, Dana Perino. It's like, yeah, like Dana Perino calls me all the time. And she said, the president would like you and some of your colleagues to come up to the presidential suite for a off the record. Would you like to come? And I said, Dana, I'm out with the Australian camera crew. Yes, absolutely, I'll be there. So the only way I can tell you this story, and it says something about ethics as well, is that the president has released me from this off-the-record promise which I made going up the elevator. It took me a month dealing with his current aide to release me from that promise, but we have been released. So going up to see the president, I had been in Iraq 4 or 5 times at this point, and I was well-versed in the conflict, all the moving parts. Even when I wasn't in Baghdad, I was staying in touch with our Iraqi staff in Baghdad about the changes that were going on in that country. So I was very interested to see whether or not there was a gap between what the president was saying in public about Iraq and what he believed privately. And I can tell you there was no difference whatsoever in this off the record. In fact, he didn't say much off the record that you hadn't already heard. So it was a cocktail party, but the president doesn't drink, so he wanted to get right to it. So we sat down and we started talking. The president started to outline what he thought was some of the progress that was going on. 2007 now, 2007. Come out of some of the worst years. 5 and 6 were really bad. 7 wasn't a whole lot better. But he said, we're making progress. And he said, we are seeing Iraqis returning from Jordan and Syria. Now, I knew that was true. They were coming back, but they weren't coming back because they wanted to come back. So I interrupt the president. I said, Mr. President, The reports are that those who are coming back have either run out of money or their visas have run out. And he said something about, well, yeah, I'm sure they feel like their country's getting better. And I interrupted him again, and I said, most Iraqis, Mr. President. And he said, most? And I said, many Iraqis, Mr. President. And he said, many? Hayes would have given me an F right there, imprecise language, no doubt about it. And then I told the president, I said, every Iraqi that I have met would get out of that country if they had the opportunity to get out of the country. Sweden has taken 7,000, and the United States has only taken 700. The reason I tell that story is that nobody is entitled to their own facts, even the leader of the free country of the United States of America. I don't know how the president was briefed. I don't know exactly what they told him, but it wasn't certainly the entire truth, and sometimes we have to speak truth to power. So we're walking out, just to finish that story, we walk out and my colleague from CNN says, way to give it to the president. And I said, that was not my point. I was not trying to give it to the president. It was, if we're going to have a discussion about policy, what's next, where we're going, don't we have to start with the foundation of facts that we can agree on? Final story. Friday night, just got home from World News Tonight, and one of the senior producers calls me, and there's the report of a Malaysian 777 that is missing. The producer wants me to update the broadcast for the West Coast. So by the time I race back to the Bureau, we know a little bit more. It was on a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, how many people were on board, how old the 777 was, how long it's been missing. It's a story that kind of took over my life for 6 weeks and is still kind of holding my attention. And yes, I do believe they will find it, maybe not this year. So about a week into our coverage, we're working on a story for that evening's broadcast. It was the Thursday. It disappeared on our time Friday night. And the Malaysians had received a lot of criticism for the way they were handling information and the conflicting stories were coming out about this. There was no sign of the plane. The question was it catastrophic failure? Was it a hijacking? Or did somebody intentionally take this plane off course? Late in the afternoon, I got some pretty good information, a tip from a source, very good information. It was actually Blockbuster. It was the word that the identification transponder, this is a transponder that sends a signal so that the radar knows what aircraft this is, had been intentionally turned off, and that the separate data communication system, this is a system that sends information about the aircraft to a satellite, had also been shut down, and the source called it a systematic shutdown. So I got one source, I need a second source. I call the executive producer of World News and say, listen, I may have this. Now I called him at 5:30, an hour before the broadcast. And I write up the details, waiting, and we finally get a second source. And that second source tells us the exact same thing. So I've got it. We are now 10 minutes to 6, 40 minutes before the broadcast. And I write up the details. We have what we call a distribution list within ABC News that we tell somebody, all my coworkers, something is reportable or something is on background. This is reportable, and we're ready to go. Now, I know that when I tell everybody at ABC News, it's going to go out on our digital platform, it's going to go out on radio, and it's going to go global. This is a really big deal. So I've got ABC News' reputation in my hand, based on two very good sources that I believe in, and I'm about ready to send this out. And I'm hovering over the send button with my cursor and getting ready for really, globally, the biggest story that I've ever broken. And I thought about the look. And I don't really just have to think about it, I actually get to look at it. So this is my desk, and the computer there is in the upper right. And in the lower left is a little frame that I keep with Hayes, with the 2 red marks underneath because it's not capitalized, and the picture of the look. And I asked myself those 3 questions. Am I right? Am I fair? Did I give the subjects an opportunity to talk? The Malaysians had a news conference every day. We've been asking these questions since the very beginning. I hit send, and we went, and it was a scramble for the next 40 minutes to get ready for our broadcast. And let me indulge you with just a little bit of
ABC's David Kerley brings us the breaking details right now. David.
Good evening, Diane. Tonight, 2 sources are telling ABC News that 2 communication systems on this 777 were shut down separately, suggesting there was not a catastrophic failure. So we had it. It was big news. But as Judy says, we were out there for a while by ourselves. Love to break news, always want somebody to match you. It's always a good idea. There were plenty of websites that started quoting us. Other news organizations quoted us. Later in the evening, others started to match at least some of our reporting. So hours later, the Malaysian acting transportation minister, who happens to also be the defense minister, was at his daily briefing, and he was asked specifically about our reporting. He didn't deal with the specifics. Instead, he starts to question the sources and suggests there needs to be an investigation of those who are talking to us.
I think from the earlier statement which I made, I said a lot of unnamed officials are making certain suggestions. And I did indicate earlier that we are investigating, so I don't think... I think we need to actually go deeper into who actually made the statements, from where, on what matter. And that will be, at the moment, I don't have the information.
This video didn't roll, I'm sorry. This is his assistant, but you saw the picture. This is the acting minister was, well, not even worry about that. So our sources remain solid, even though the minister was questioning who was talking to us and why they were talking to us. And then the next day, and this was a first for me, this is the Malaysian Prime Minister, and he held a news conference, and basically, not basically, the Prime Minister of Malaysia confirmed everything we'd reported.
We can say with a high degree of certainty that the aircraft communications addressing and reporting system, or ACUS, was disabled. The aircraft transponder was switched off. These movements are consistent with deliberate action by someone on the plane.
So it was a genuine scoop, and it was quite a morning to watch him confirm everything we'd reported. We reported across all of our platforms, digital, radio, television. I didn't refine any standards. I used the standards that I was taught at Cal Poly 36 years ago. So while the basic tools have changed, I would argue that the basics of what we do day in and day out have not. Now, I've been talking about cavemen, and I got to tell you, I'm no dinosaur. Are we telling different stories than we told 10 years ago? Yes. Are we telling them differently than we did 10 years ago? Yes. Are there those who think that the stories that Americans want to hear not serious? Yes, but that's the subject of another symposium. Whatever stories we cover, they have to be right, they have to be fair. That is simple, ethical journalism practiced with integrity. It's the only way the tribe will let you carry the torch to the back of the cave and find out what is there. And for all the students, if you haven't seen it, look at the look, because it might change your life too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. You know, it's interesting. I didn't realize until just recently that Dave had the same photo of the look above his desk that I have above my desk as well. So it's continuing to have an impact on many of us. Again, happy to have people come up and ask any questions they might have of Dave before we move on to our next speaker. I do have a quick question, and this speaks to one of the questions you asked yourself, and that is, have I given people adequate opportunity to respond? I've noticed this trend in recent years, both in Washington and Sacramento, that instead of phone calls, returning phone calls, a lot of it's just email exchanges, email comments, and obviously the respondent then can limit the amount of information they give to the reporter. How has that changed the way you cover stories, or has it made it more difficult?
Yeah, it absolutely has made it more difficult. I always ask, usually, can we have a conversation? I'm a party of a $1.2 billion lawsuit, which I'm not supposed to talk about. But part of what I did in my reporting there was asking, because all they were doing was responding through email, can we have a conversation? Can you please call me? I have some questions. And the give and take on the email is, can be very tedious. And I find some of the high-tech companies, that's about the only way they will talk to you, and it's extremely frustrating. There are times when you need, and you can hear something in their voice, you can hear the tone, you can hear the pauses. Earlier today, somebody asked me a question, I had a little pause, and they thought that meant something when I was actually just thinking. So it's made it much more difficult.
We have a question right here.
David, my name's Leo, and I'm an ag comm major, and I'm really interested in the story behind the speakers here today, and what I'm wondering about is, what do you think is, what does it take to reach the level of success that you've reached, or that some of the other speakers here today have reached? Because there's a lot of students here who are at the border of, graduating and going into the real world, but there's also some that are just barely starting college. What do you think it takes to be successful?
Pete talked about this a little bit earlier, and a roundabout way to get to the answer is I changed major. That's why I didn't join journalism until my junior year. In my sophomore year, I was searching for something new, and I thought I wanted a specific thing, and the closest thing to it was KCPR, and I walked in and I said, what can I do to find out if I like this? And they said, do public service announcements or the news. And I did the news, and it was like, oh my gosh, I became a caveman. It was like, this is the coolest thing ever, to find out things before anybody else does. And the reason is I'm a very curious guy. It's all about curiosity. And it just drives me that I want to find out something. It won't even be my story. And I'll watch somebody's piece and it didn't answer a couple of questions I want, and I'll start looking for the answers myself. I think curiosity is part of the passion that takes you going, and then you have to be persistent. It's a fun job, but it's a difficult job. I mean, we were talking last night. I got a call. I'm on vacation. I'm coming to a symposium, and they asked me to come to work. I was in Los Angeles to go to work. I mean, as somebody said, they own you, and they do. But boy, I've been on every continent but Antarctica on ABC's dime. I've seen a lot of stuff. I've traveled with presidents. I've talked to prime ministers. That's kind of fun. I'm having a great time.
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question. This is a guy I don't know if I want to get a question from.
Okay,
Well,
we're done. No, just
This
kidding.
is a hypothetical, so you have an easy dodge. The plain information. You haven't pushed the button yet. You get a call from the prime minister or somebody in the government, say, yes, the switches were thrown, but we are in the midst of an investigation to find out who threw them, and your report would compromise that investigation for some unknown period of time. What is the ethical drill that follows?
Yeah, well, that's really not a hypothetical. It happens all the time. It may have happened to some people here where the White House or DOD comes and says, if you publish this information, you're going to jeopardize X, Y, and Z. And we've seen the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC News make a decision one way or the other. It depends on the specifics of the situation. It depends on a lot of factors. That would not have been a decision I made. If I got that call from the Prime Minister and they said that, it's going up to a way higher level. We have somebody similar to Karen, and they're on the phone, the lawyer's on the phone, all the editorial bigwigs, the news division president, everybody is in on that call. And it's like any of the other decisions that a publication would make about, I think a lot of the Snowden stuff, this was the same issue. At what point is it the public good, and what point are we going to do harm? And there is no one answer to that question. And I don't think I could give you one now. I think in this case, the plane was missing. It was pretty obvious it wasn't any place on the ground. My guess is after we looked at all the information, we probably would have gone with it, but that's just a guess. And that would have been my suggestion, that it wouldn't hurt. I mean, at this point, how would it hurt the investigation? Unless they had people on the ground that they were tracing back, then that'd be a different story. Hypothetical with a bunch of hypotheticals, how is that?
Anybody else? Mark?
So Dave, to go back to today's earlier conversation about emotionalism of reporters and so forth, I'd just be very curious in your opinion as a professional TV journalist, how you view this trend that we've really seen, especially with the Ferguson coverage and so forth. For me as a longtime communications person, I find it really offensive when I watch, especially the Ferguson coverage and the reporter injecting his personal viewpoints and opinions. And I'd just be curious what your thoughts are.
That's what was so brilliant about Judy's presentation, is that we are humans, and there are times when we react with very human emotions. And I can tell you there have been plenty of times when I was a local anchor that stories, you know, went right to me, and usually it was a story about somebody that you cared about, and it was a tragic story, and it's difficult to maintain. I think the two examples that we saw earlier, especially if you go back to Cronkite, I mean, those are very different to me. One was an emotional, and the other one was more of a statement. We are human beings, and there are times when we are going to react. I got to tell you, on the Katrina story, the Anderson Cooper, I was in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I had a guttural reaction to what was going on in Mississippi. You never saw it on television, and other than talking about the destruction. But you didn't see what I personally felt about what was happening in Mississippi, and there was no reason for it. Just the facts, ma'am. That's the problem. I mean, part of what this paper from Reuters was talking about is that we need to start writing in a voice, have a voice, which kind of gets back to what Karen was talking about, of everybody's, you know, got their Twitter handle and they're trying to find their own brand. And really, you need a voice? I mean, you're supposed to be an intelligent person who can decide whether or not what this information means to you and what you want to do for it, with it. I've always felt that my job is to give you information and then you make decisions about your life. And I've kind of gotten off track, but in general, I agree with you. But there are times when you're going to see emotion, and it's often justified.
David, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Is there a difference between professional ethics and professional ethics? And I ask this with some background.
Professional and personal, you mean?
Yes, professional and personal ethics. Because I was visiting with a photojournalist who was at Katrina, and he came upon a scene where he had somebody there who was reaching out and asking for help. And his question was, do I take a picture or do I save this man's life? Is there a difference?
We're all human beings. This is Ed Bradley in Africa for 60 minutes with a bunch of people who were on a boat, and he went out into the water and scooped them out and helped bring a couple of them to the beach, and there was a lot of debate at that time as whether a reporter should be involved. That's each person's call. Personally, I don't know that I could stand there and watch. If I can offer help that did something for this person, I don't know how you do that. And you know, I kind of mentioned about the look, defining my journalism, where I am in journalism, and I mentioned that it also helped define me as a man. I think I live my life now by these, you know, truth, and you know, I get, sometimes people give me a hard time of being too honest, but that's, if I'm going to do that in my professional life, how do I not do that in my personal life? I know that doesn't go to your question, but it's a dilemma a lot of us face, and I think it depends on the situation. But if I can help somebody and they're not going to die because I can help them, I'm going to help them. And I don't really care whether it's recorded or not. And quite honestly, I kind of wish it wasn't. I don't know what Ed Bradley thought about them filming him for 60 minutes, but. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Dave. I'm going to follow up on that because we were both at Katrina on different sides. We didn't even know about it until years later. David was in Biloxi, and I was in the field hospital, which was set up in the New Orleans airport. We actually took over the New Orleans airport and turned it into a huge hospital for about 6-7 weeks. And I hope that what I say now is apropos to what David just said. A lot of the physicians at the time, and those of us who were there, were asked about remaining professionally detached with the chaos and horror that was all around us. And believe me, it was chaos and it was horror. I saw worse when I was a soldier in Vietnam, but that's the only time in my life I've seen anything that bad, and I never expected to see that in the United States. And I think a lot of us had the same reaction. If my emotional involvement will help somebody get better, then we'll be emotionally involved. But most of the time, that has nothing to do with it, okay? The best thing we could do to help somebody is to continue to help them. And the professional part of that means very often that emotional involvement is not very helpful.
I'll give you a direct answer because it was Katrina as well.
Yeah.
The storm was, Biloxi ended up being the bullseye, and the eye of the storm was kind of over the city. So we took off in our vehicle and started driving toward the ocean, and we were at an overpass on an interstate, and there's this young man and young woman who pop up off the interstate. There is nobody out. And I told the crew, pull over, and told these two kids to get inside. They had floated down the drainage canal or the river or whatever it was on a refrigerator. So that was a simple one. I mean, they're out in the middle, the back end of the storm is coming. I'm not going to let them stand out there. So we put them in the car and took them back to where we were based. So, I mean, I don't know if their lives were at risk. They certainly weren't comfortable, and we got them some blankets and some water and some food.
The only thing I'll add is that in the coverage that I saw, which, by the way, none of us saw it until later. Obviously, none of the televisions or radios, nothing worked. The internet didn't work. So I didn't see any of it until weeks later. I asked people at the office to tape everything for us so we could look at it another time. It turns out that all of us kind of agree, and David was one of the people who easily passed muster, that the folks at the time who said, very straightforward, this is chaos. This is horrible, okay? Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. That was helpful.
It was actually, Ted Koppel was still doing Nightline, and it was one of my favorite lines. He seemed to kind of like it too. We were just doing a live, we call it a talk back or a two-way. And we had just gotten to the beach. I'd never seen that Mississippi coastline before. And I drove in the night before. They actually made me leave New Orleans Sunday night into Monday. I said, you really want me to leave? I mean, no one's getting back in here. They already had the reverse lanes going and everything. And they said, no, go to Biloxi. And then, of course, the storm came to us, which was great for news coverage until the levees broke, and then everybody forgot about Biloxi for quite a while. But driving from New Orleans to Biloxi was beautiful. All these nice old southern mansions, big houses along the Mississippi coast, and you get to Biloxi, and I took a left, and we were going to stay in a hotel on the beach, and a seasoned hurricane veteran, this was my first hurricane, said, you don't want to stay on the beach, you need to move inland. So we moved inland, and we went through the storm all day, did World News Tonight. It wasn't until World News Tonight released us at 7 p.m. that we were able to get down to the beach. And all those houses were gone. It was remarkable to have seen them, less than 24 hours earlier, and they were completely gone the next day. It was quite the story to cover.
Okay, we don't want to run short on time, so let's go ahead and take one more question.
A ringer.
Thank you, David. I was pleased to hear the young journalist ask how he can be like you, and I think part of the answer is to exhaust yourself through research, through physical exhaustion as well as mental. I'm not sure I ever wrote a story when I was practicing journalism that was as perfect as it could be without being exhausted in some way. And the point is in today's world, it's so easy to hit the send button that you contemplated hitting and letting the commentators finish the story for you. I think that's a very easy out and a very easy habit to get into. Exhaustion is part of the answer to that question that he asked you, I think.
Thank you, Craig. That's why I drink a lot of coffee.
All right, David Kerley, thank you very much.
Thank you.